The fight for justice, the fight for equality, the fight for every person's humanity to be acknowledged, as well as their right to access essential services, to access opportunities for advancement, and their right to be protected. These are all fights that began long before many of us were born. But we find ourselves in 2021 still fighting for the acknowledgement of truth and the eradication of violence, racism, bigotry, and exclusion. Hello and welcome to a new episode of the Workplace Revolution with me, Sihle Bolani. Joining me for today's conversation is global thought leader, peace advocate, and strategist, Dr. Bernice A. King. Dr. King is also the Chief Executive Officer of the King Center for Nonviolent Social Change and the daughter of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and Ms. Coretta Scott King. Through her work at the King Center, Dr. King educates youth and adults around the world about the nonviolent principles and strategies modeled by her parents. Under her leadership, the center has implemented numerous initiatives that have reached over 500,000 people, such as the annual Camp Now, Leadership Academy, Students with King, Nonviolence 365 education and trainings, and the beloved Community Talks, a courageous conversations platform about the difficult racial and social justice issues impacting our world. Dr. King, hello and welcome to the Workplace Revolution.
Thank you so much. I'm glad to be here with you.
Fantastic. So, Dr. King, your parents' very, very prolific legacy in the fight for justice and equality has for decades reverberated across the world. How did their work, the resistance and violence that they faced influence your path, your understanding of the world, as well as your decision to contribute towards being the change while keeping their legacy alive and authentic?
Now that's a big question. Oh Lord, I'm trying to figure out how to deal with that in bite sizes. Obviously I grew up in a home where I got an opportunity, especially to see my mother kind of at work and in action. I didn't really know my father. I was 5 when he was assassinated. But my mother did an extraordinary job of helping me and my siblings. I have 3 siblings, 3 siblings, 2 brothers and a sister. My sister's deceased now. She did an excellent, she was excellent at helping us to understand the work that they were involved in the 50s and 60s, and often invoked the teachings that were utilized in the movement. But the extraordinary thing was that she didn't just talk to us about it, she was exhibiting it on a daily basis, fighting for the rights of women. She was a part of the early days of, at that point it was called the movement for gay rights, which is LGBTQ today. She was at the forefront even before meeting my father in the peace movement. She was a very strong voice in that movement. She fought for full employment, for the abolition of the death penalty. She fought for fair pay. I mean, everything you can think of on the front of justice and equity, she was a foremost voice in. She raised us as a part of building the institution that she founded 2.5 months after my father's assassination as the official living memorial to the life, work, and legacy of my father. And so she involved us in all of the training that took place there. In fact, I ended up going through some training at the age of 12 and went back through a few years later, became head of our student and university conference related to nonviolence. And through the years, through time, I began to study my father. It was probably later in my 30s, because for a few years, I was trying to find my own identity. And part of that was because I was called to ministry at the age of 17. And all I could think of at that time was what would happen to me with this call in ministry in terms of my identity, because I'll be forever branded as just the daughter of Dr. King, and people would not, see and know Bernice. So it took me about 8 years to answer that call. And as a part of that, I kind of ran from, you know, him. I did not study him a lot. I studied him very little. Didn't really listen to a lot of his speeches or sermons at that time. But I did eventually go to school, theology school here is what you call it. And I went to law school as well and got both a doctorate of law and a master of divinity degree. And it was, that was in my late 20s. But in my 30s, I started slowly studying more and more about my father. And as I became head of the King Center in my late 40s is when I really came full circle. We were raised with all of these teachings. Now I'm head of this institution. And so I really dove in and started looking at many of his teachings before then, which has influenced my work. Early on, I was very active on the front lines of the things that people are doing now on the front lines of justice I was involved in. I see myself now in a different position. I think because of my experience on the front line and being the daughters of those who kind of introduced the philosophy and methodology of social change, that the world really needs to be educated and trained in what helped to bring about social change in America as a result of the movement that my parents led. And so a large part of my work is trying to influence in that space now to help people to navigate with the appropriate teachings and strategies to bring about social change.
Right. And, it actually leads me into my next question. We often hear about justice being needed and justice being fought for, justice being denied, whether it's socially, economically, or professionally, in so many different spaces. But what does justice actually mean to you, Dr. King?
Well, that's an interesting question because justice, as we all know, is multifaceted, and it shows up in many dimensions: political, social, legal, economic. But if I had to boil it down to anything, it would be what my father spoke about, which is a part of the campaign that we have recently launched through the King Center called Be Love. And we're inviting people to join us in this campaign to get a better understanding of the power of love to transform society and systems and culture and people. And it was inspired by my father's words around power, love, and justice. And he said that power at its best is love implementing the demands of justice. But he said justice at its best is love correcting everything that stands against love. And when you understand that, in many respects, justice is love. It's love that seeks to correct those things that don't line up with fairness, with equity, with dignity, with respect for human rights. And so that's the way that I look at it. And anything that is not aligned with that, we have to do the work to correct it. And so, yes, so that's the way I define love. Love and justice are inseparable to me. I don't think you can do the work of justice adequately without love, because in the end, you want to create, it's not just about correcting the situation. There's something about ensuring that there is a sense of harmony and equilibrium in relationship too. So, many times when people speak of justice, it's very personal. It's very self-oriented. And I think holistically, when we look at justice, we have to think about not just the individuals that are victimized by the situation, directly victimized. We have to think about how people are indirectly impacted as well. And even those who are perpetrators of injustice, many of them are victims of their unjust behavior. And so we have to kind of correct everything so we can bring alignment back to our human connectedness. And I know that's very complicated, but that's the way I see justice.
Right. Now, we face an incredible amount of barriers in our pursuit for justice. We're met with resistance in the form of denialism, in the form of policies, there's police brutality that we're dealing with, economic exclusion. The list is so long. And it can feel very disempowering and frustrating and hopeless for many people. I've often heard people share that they believe that violence is the only way that they'll be heard because their voices are not being heard. But the King Center very strongly advocates for nonviolent social justice. There's an interview that Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. did about 11 months or so before his assassination, where he spoke about his belief that violence is much more socially destructive and creates many more social problems than it solves. And you've also mentioned in one of your speeches that your mother, Miss Coretta Scott King, said somebody has to cut off the chain of violence. What are some of the strategies that can be used to achieve justice through nonviolent tactics when people feel that their voices are not being heard?
Well, I think one of the things that we have to try to correct with people is it's more to it than just having your voice heard. It's about an ultimate goal. So what we try to do in our training is to set people's minds on what is it ultimately you're trying to achieve? What is the outcome that you're hoping for? For us, holistically, the beloved community is that vision. It's that goal. If you're going to get to the beloved community, if you're going to get to this state of justice, that's not just personal, but it's social, it's collective, then you have to have strategies that are consistent with that end. My father said you cannot get to peaceful ends or just ends through non-peaceful means or unjust means. In other words, violence will never carve out a pathway towards peace and lasting change and justice. It will leave in its wake other problems, as he said, because what happens with violence is there are these seeds that are planted, and those who you may quote unquote have victory over will one day, either through themselves or through people that they raise, will one day rise up again because those seeds of destruction have been left there. And so the strategy has to be focused on, I'm trying to get to this ultimate end of justice or equity or the beloved community. What are the proper means to get there? For us, though, that means keeping it focused on the issue. We call it in our principle number 3, that nonviolence seeks to destroy injustice and not people. Ensuring that you are not humiliating people in the process, because the goal, again, is to transform both people and systems. And more importantly, not to allow yourself to be changed into being like the person who is perpetuating the injustice. And so in that regard, we talk about how do you create a means of winning people over instead of winning over people, because nonviolence is about a win-win outcome ultimately. And so these principles that we teach really are the foundation to bringing about this ultimate change. And they're very difficult because in our instinctual way as a human, when we've been violated, when we have been attacked, the natural inclination for all of us is to want to attack back with the equal force or greater force to destroy that person, to diminish that person, to get rid of that person, to maybe even annihilate the person. And yet in the end, injustice still remains, because injustice is not particular to a person. It finds a host again, another person, in other words. And so you have to stay focused on, how do I separate this person who's doing the unjust act and put my attention, all of my aggression towards the injustice or the inequity or the wrongdoing, and put my conciliation toward the human. And so I do things that are geared toward awakening within that person some sort of emotion that will cause them to realize that what they are doing is inhumane. And that's why Daddy and them would suffer, those blows, because they wanted to make clear what the issue was, that the issue was about the injustice of whatever the discriminatory act, law was, and the behavior that came with that. And they also wanted to appeal to whatever degree of consciousness that person had, as well as the greater. And this is important, because many times people are so focused on the person who's perpetuating the injustice, the wrongdoing, or doing the violence toward them. But there's in a movement. Now, we're speaking about a movement now. I'm not talking about an individual's right to defend themselves outside of that context. But in a movement, if you get focused, like for instance, if you get focused on a neo-Nazi or a white supremacist, and you have that tunnel vision, you forget that there are people that are on the sideline that you are trying to also bring in as allies to the struggle. And oftentimes when violence is used in response, people back off. They don't want to join that kind of movement. And they certainly they can get confused as to what's really the issue. So, these are the kind of things that we teach. These are the things that I believe in. And I don't see any other way. Yes, violence may get you heard, but it doesn't necessarily bring the needed change.
One of the things that I have observed, and particularly because the work that I do focuses a lot on workplace-related issues around inequality, and one of the biggest challenges is around the fear that people have. So, we have all of these hurdles that exist when it comes to organizing ourselves to be able to fight for justice. In a non-violent way, but so many people are afraid of the risks that comes with the risk of loss of income, the risk of those negative social impacts. How do we navigate that to be able to organize ourselves effectively for change and the right kind of impact?
Well, my philosophy is that you have to keep aligning with those people who do understand that there is courage that's needed to bring change. Yeah, a lot of people get focused on trying to get as many people as possible, and I don't think, while that may be a lofty goal, it's not a realistic goal. Change usually comes through a dedicated minority of people. And it's those people that you have to continue to cultivate. And as you cultivate that group, and as you continue to educate others, over time, a few others come along. That happened oftentimes in the movement. People need to see the example of others willing to make that sacrifice. And some will be attracted to it. Others will still say, it's not for me. I got to worry about this, that, and the other. And there's a thing called the universe being on the side of justice. God is on the side of justice. And there are situations where, as you are aligning yourself with the work of justice, and you're doing it out of that strength of love and the power of love, situations and circumstances begin to organize themselves beyond you that causes people to have a change of heart. When the movement started, I tell people all the time, there were not a lot of people that were aligned under my father's philosophy of how to bring this social change in the South. But through time, because of his willingness to be courageous and to risk the loss of everything, and the others that would join with him, a few began to come along and say, if he can do this, then I should do this. And even if they don't come along at the same level, there are different ways people can participate and support. People can do research. You know, you can say, hey, everybody doesn't have to be the vocal person. In other words, for me, that makes it more complicated when you have too many voices anyway, particularly if those voices have not collectively aligned themselves, because you can send mixed messages and then, you know, that muddies the waters and complicates so much that, you know, people don't know what you're trying to do. And it makes it difficult to get to the ultimate end. And so let people fit in where they're comfortable. Okay, if you're not comfortable being the vocal person, could you provide research around this issue? That's another way, because through time, even that research can touch somebody's heart and awaken them to, my God, I do need to do more. So let's not just, you know, push people aside because, you know, they won't speak up, they won't get involved. Find other creative ways to get them connected. And as you continue doing what you're doing, hopefully they will be inspired. And because they're doing something, even if it's on the fringes or the margins, it over time, I think you'll win some of those people over.
Absolutely. Now, it's 53 years since the King Center was founded by your mother. What is your dream now for the world?
You know, I don't, yeah, I don't think I have anything different in mind than my parents. I think my my mission to get there um, is a little bit more. I won't even say it's more steeped, because I think they had the same mission. They just didn't have the lifespan to get it done, which is to raise up generations of people who are practitioners and ambassadors for nonviolence, because I don't see any other way to create a just, humane, equitable, and peaceful world. Um, Nonviolence is not the opposite of violence. You know, we say it's a love-centered, uh, way of, and I keep losing, I keep losing this definition. It's a love-centered way of thinking, acting, and speaking, and even engaging, that brings about personal, cultural, and social transformation. And I don't think there's anything out there that can do it. And so, you know, my dream is that there will be a world of these individuals who they are diehard when it comes to this. And as a result, we will begin to see these communities around the world where people have respect for human rights, where there is an equitable distribution of resources and opportunities, where there is fairness, and people do get to have just outcomes. So that's my dream. That's my passion. That's my heart, and that's what I'm working towards.
Thank you so much, Dr. King, for your time and for everything that you've shared today. And also, importantly, thank you so much for the very, very important work that you are doing through the King Center.
Thank you. I appreciate it.